do that. All right. Hey everyone, welcome to Authenticate 2020, Monday. It's nice to have an afternoon start, get everybody acquainted with the area. My name is Dennis Hills, and I'm a senior developer advocate or solutions architect at Yubico, and I support our customer developers that are implementing any kind of FIDO2, PIV, any kind of authentication, back-end, front-end, user interface, whatever it might be. So I'm excited about today because I've been working with a lot of the mobile side of things. So I work with iOS and Android, but mostly iOS recently with some of the changes supporting PIV and smart card. So today we're going to talk about phishing-resistant MFA and the executive order. So kind of talking about the executive order. I'll go through the list. What the executive order is, how it came about. Talk about some of the phishing-resistant MFA, which there's really, I'll narrow it down to two. So there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, but I've kind of pulled out some key areas and takeaways that are going to have the most impact for the business, the ecosystem, and then a lot of the companies driving this forward. So we'll talk a little bit about zero trust architecture. I'm not going to get too far into it because it's just kind of broad. But when we talk about phishing-resistant MFA and the order, it all kind of applies to that standard and that framework. And then I follow up with the developing ecosystem, talk about the drivers from Yubico and Microsoft and Google, those that are supporting this on their side, you know, the cloud providers or the centralized identity providers providing things like Azure CBA for this system to kind of keep moving. And then I'll go for some of the other areas that are going to be breaking and have quick adoption, like derived credentials. If anybody's heard of derived credentials, derived PIV, or derived FIDO credentials, you may have heard of that. And then how that takes the standard PIV, 25 years in service, and moves it on to more of a mobile-centric area. So like bring your own device or mobile authentication and still supporting the executive order. So with the recent number of attacks, we've had some significant impact on critical systems. The White House has released the executive order. This is called 414028 with some of the recent attacks. And if you want to go to that, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but some of the recent attacks on the government, on agencies, a lot of attacks. The government came out with May 12, 2021, and talked about implementing multi-factor authentication within 180 days and a plan for zero trust in 60 days, where you trust no thing, no one until the entity is well vetted before giving access to the important system and data. So really that kind of set the stage back in 2021. Everything was kind of moving. It's like here, we're going to just say everything is focused on MFA. And there was other things in there, and I'll talk about those. There are 50 events, but I want to just talk about this because these are kind of the important piece because it's Authenticate. We're going to be talking about MFA. So this is one of the most detailed U.S. executive orders in cybersecurity that we've seen in recent years. So there's a lot of work going on in the government. We'll talk more about the impact on your business as well. So the executive order really applies to the public sector, to the agencies, these civilian agencies. But it's really going to trickle down to everyone, all the way down to enterprise and below for those that support it eventually. So following the executive order, the White House Office of Management and Budget, OMB, I think we have Eric is probably, I don't know if he's in the house, but he's here today. So there are a few people from OMB might be here. And this is really sets the stage for Microsoft and other companies to kind of apply this executive order, to kind of take over, set the strategy in place for mandating multi-factor authentication, prioritizing cloud adoption, and then for all federal agencies to apply these by the end of year 2024, so just about another year and a half away from this. So we got some other significant takeaways from the memo and the zero trust architecture. We have users should log into applications rather than networks. For public users, phishing-resistant MFA must be an option. So remember, we go back to the executive order. Before, it was just MFA. Now it's becoming phishing-resistant MFA. So we'll talk about that a little bit because that's a significant difference, right? When you talk MFA, we're like, okay, let's do some OTP, we got it, log in. And so we also have options for public sites, like let's say login.gov, supporting both PIV and FIDO2 as well. So we'll talk about that. So in a nutshell, I'm not going to go too far into FIDO, especially because most of us know about the FIDO things, but I want to talk about phishing resistant, especially like PIV, because some of you may not be familiar with the PIV, the smart card, and the credentials that the federal government's been using for 25 years and how that's changing right before our eyes, even before the executive order, but even more so now that the executive order is in place. We're going to start seeing those CAC PIV cards move into more of a mobile, like a Yubico or a FIPS authenticator in there for those mobile users. So as part of the executive order and the National Mandate 8, the standards have driven beyond the most basic multi-factor authentication. So all users have phishing-resistant authentication available, options available. So that's kind of the directive to say all these civilian agencies need to do this. But again, this is going to be far-reaching for other businesses that fall behind that, that want to support them, contractors, and it'll all come out to following the phishing-resistant MFA. Again, the executive order is way more far-reaching than just the executive branch. So, what exactly is phishing-resistant MFA? I want to read this. The phishing-resistant MFA, according to the budget, this is the memo M2209, if you want to get technical. The U.S. federal agencies require FIPS validated technology, but there's two in there. The federal government personal identity verification, that's the PIV smart card, which I'll talk about that technology. They've been using it for 25 years. It's a proven technology. There's some limitations in there. So that's been approved, right? The PIV card. Number two, FIDO2 WebAuthn standard is the second one. So these are the two standards that determine in the OMB to say we can use these in these civilian agencies to use for authentication. So not phishing resistant is the SMS, mobile push, one-time passwords are not acceptable forms of MFA as these are shown to be vulnerable to phishing. And we've seen that all over. I mean, there's probably several talks about all the impacts, the attacks, all the different aggressive ways for hackers to get in. Remember, hackers don't break in, they log in. So that's funny, huh? It's true. I think we even say that on the Yubico website. But so the idea is that these two are the proven standard. So the PIV standard and then the FIDO2 standard, which we'll talk about. All right, so the PIV. This is the personal identity verification credential. Anybody not familiar with PIV? Everybody? Okay, I'll go through fast then. So the government's been using this for 25 plus years. They use it to access desktop environments, controlled environments. It's fully vetted. They have their identity there. They come in the form of this card there, if you've seen them, if anybody's in the military for that. And they're called PIV CAT card, smart card. They have a certificate. And some of the things you might hear is like client certificate-based authentication. So there's a certificate on there, and it uses the public key cryptography, just like the FIDO2. And that's what they've been using for many years. This is now approved for phishing resistant. It's domain-based. So the problem with one of these is this card needs a reader. It needs some kind of reader or scanner. Microsoft's been using it for their employees for a while, that type of thing. But you're kind of bound to the desktop. And that's why we're talking about this whole zero trust analogy. We're trying to come in and get everybody to log into the systems. But before, you just had these desktop environments. So everybody was kind of stuck in this, this environment where they had to use these CAT cards. So that'll be changing here shortly. Then I'm going to go through this too, because obviously we know WebAuthn. The W3 standards, FIDO Alliance, again, a standard. FIDO2 enables users to leverage common devices to authenticate Alliance services in both mobile and desktop environments. Now, there are mobile readers. You know, you could plug in a scanner and scan it, and NFC, and all those weird things, and plug it in, Bluetooth possibly, but they're problematic. And there's been a lot of issues, and so that's kind of been the reason why the adoption has been so slow for mobile. It's been pretty much you're stuck, you're siloed in there. you need a managed device, you're going to go on desktop. So that's where FIDO2 might come in. And then we're going to talk about, anybody familiar with derived credentials in here? Okay, good. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to just breeze through zero trust because everything's kind of flies into the zero trust framework where we have application layer control. We're no longer logging in some VPN and say, yep, you're good to go on this network, you're fine. It's all about the application level. We're talking about the centralized identity and cloud, but you have to be authenticated, so trust no one. And I'll talk about these are the pillars, but I'll talk about no actor, system, network, or service trusted. Verify anything and everything attempting to establish access. There's a lot of terminology here, a lot of ways to really look at it, but the old model of verify once at the perimeter and you can get in. So that's why a lot of people, we've heard zero trust as perimeterless, and it's basically saying it's not, you don't get in the perimeter and access applications. You have to come in at application layer and go for it there. So that kind of sets the stage. This is all OMB, part of that document for the zero trust model, having strong level of trust in the authentication mechanism, and then every user and every device attempting to access the company resources will need to be vetted before they can access any network or outside services. So zero trust is the new regulatory minimum for the federal agencies under President Biden's new executive order. And then work is being done to work towards that policy using like MFA, application layer support, and so forth. So executive order takeaway. Let's talk about some of the things that highlight approximately 50 actions or something inside the executive order. Their topics cover everything from encryption to the supply chain to software, everything else. But I want to highlight the key takeaways that will push the entire industry forward and have the most impact on our ecosystem. And those are phishing-resistant MFA requirements for all agencies. I think this is going to be the big one. I mean, this is the top priority. Stop them at the gate, require phishing-resistant MFA requirements for all these agencies. And I think what we'll see is the agencies will have to apply this, and then those contractors and those that support those agencies, and I'll talk about that linear part where it goes from like 40 million to millions of users that are going to have to support this if they want to work with the government agencies, all the way down to enterprise and smaller. Zero trust, centralized IM systems, MFA at the application layer. We're going to see a lot of areas like Google and Microsoft will offer centralized identity and cloud providers and offering those application. One example is Microsoft 365, is logging in and being able to access mail. And then cloud migration is going to be another big one that's going to, right now it's impacting those cloud providers. They're going to create these identity platforms like we're talking right now with Microsoft, with the Azure AD CBA, which is their certificate-based authentication, currently in beta. It works great with CAC PIV or FIDO2, so those work really great. And now inside the OMB, they're saying that we want these agencies to aggressively go to the cloud. And so that's where we're going to start seeing that application level support. And then so Microsoft and Google and AWS are going to start building off of that and say, okay, here's our solutions. And that'll be anything from a centralized identity to access IM accounts, whatever it might be for those users. Because if you're not familiar, all these agencies have all these disparate interests and siloed and proprietary networks or whatever it might be. Some of them use like a VM, some use direct access, some use skiffs, whatever they might be. They will have access. So I think that's part of that migration. So those are the three kind of takeaways for this. So now we'll talk about moving the needle. So we talked about, I think most of you said you knew about derived credentials. So we talk about these three things are really going to move the needle to get this ball rolling. So before, if we say, okay, MFA, PIV, great, okay, there's not a lot of growth there because we have all these mobile users in the military. They have all these Android and iOS devices. They need to get to these resources. And the only way to do it is through PIV, and there's just no way to do it. There's not a good way to do it. So when we talk about derived PIV credentials, there's a new, let me make sure I get this right, the NIST publication expanding the PIV smart card trust model to other hardware devices known as derived credentials. So basically anything is a derived credential, but we have derived PIV credentials. So somebody who has a PIV credential or CAT card, they take it and they get vetted, and they can get those credentials put onto a secure element like a FIPS provided authenticator, and then take that and plug it into their Android or their iOS device and authenticate as if they were like on the desktop. So that's going to be a huge movement, and I don't think a lot of people are really talking about that, is having that access to the FIDO-PIV credentials, both on Yubico or any kind of other device, so it makes it more portable. Bring your own device. That kind of ties into the same thing. So we have all these military folks running around with iPhones and Androids in the field, and they're active duty. They need to access MyPay. They need to access vacation. They need to access mail. And this is an opportunity for them to now say, we've expanded this language, and now they can use their own device, and not a managed device. We're not talking a managed device with MDM or anything, just their own device. Then they have this vetted derived credential, either PIV or FIDO2, and they can log in to a centralized identity provider like Microsoft Azure AD and get their mail and Office 365 wherever they are. So completely mobile. They don't have to be in the office. They don't have to be desktop. They want to do MyPay, whatever it might be. The other third one, which we talked about earlier, is prioritizing cloud migration. That's huge because we're going to see this drive towards the centralized authentication platforms. They'll be more robust, more security, and then the agencies don't have to worry about that. Sort of like when you go to the cloud, you just let them use the security in the cloud, shared responsibilities, and work on that central identity platform and use those MFA to access those applications. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this real quick. So when it comes to derived PIV credentials and bring your own device, I want to throw out the Yubico because I get 5% commission for every Yubico that's sold. Just kidding. Just kidding. The Yubico is a really good one. It has both PIV credentials and FIDO2 used for mobile. You get USB-C. So give an example. Somebody wants to access their mail or MyPay or something. They can have the derived credential on there, simply log in, and have access on their own device that's not managed. So something to think about where we're moving away from that CAC world to still secure, still using PIV if we want to, or FIDO2, and phishing resistant MFA with a simple key in your pocket. Okay, how many minutes do I have? A couple minutes? Less than 5? Okay, so let's talk about this. I'm going to talk about the impact. So Executive Order 14028 only applies to federal civilian agencies. Okay, I just want to make sure that's clear. However, the OMB guidance has a huge ripple effect on everybody as it goes through, and you can see those different agencies. Now notice that the DoD, intelligence community, and defense, those are not controlled. They have a different directive, the NSM 8 directive, but very much aligned with the executive order. So that's why we put those in there, so you can see the impact going down and traversing down into the enterprises and consumers. Not only the cloud providers, but everybody who uses those providers will need to start adopting some of these technologies. Okay, so continue on with the impact. March 21st of this year, the White House released a new memo saying, act now to protect against potential cyber attacks. Now, again, this talks about where we were talking about the public sector, right? Now, the government is saying, hey, mandate the use of multi-factor authentication for all our US companies, everybody who supports not even just the government, but supports their customers and provides the customers. So they're saying even more so we need multi-factor authentication. So it's not just like, okay, well, it's a directive for the public sector, that's fine, it doesn't need to be me. But they're coming down and saying, this is really important, we're doing it, you need to do it for your own reason and support the whole ecosystem. So again, we're seeing huge impacts all the way down to the ecosystem in many cases. Federal agency guidelines sometimes become just the standard adopted by enterprises. So, okay, so the last piece, when the president speaks, most people listen. It's no longer up to debate. Phishing resistant MFA is kind of the thing, the top story for this executive order. The urgency you can read in Biden's statement for the executive order from the earlier briefing from March 21st. We're living through times that change fast and can be unpredictable. So includes, there's priority that we want to focus on cybersecurity attack. We want to include phishing-resistant MFA, and then you'll be better prepared for the next attack, either current or future. Even though we don't know what happens, they have created this MFA support for future cybersecurity attacks. And I think that's it for out of time. And thanks for coming out. I'm good. Oh, that's it anyway. I could take 5 minutes. Any questions? Yeah.
That requirement for the centralized identity management, does that require that the authenticator be stored in a centralized location, or can it still be stored locally, even though you're using a centralized identity management system?
Yeah, I would refer to the spec for that. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of details, and I think it's finalized, but yeah, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly all the details on where they're storing, and there's some evolving changes as well to that. Yeah, the OMB is the one to go to, the Office of Management and Budget. That's the one that kind of throws out the guideline, talks about the zero trust and the supported MFA security. Anything else? Did you? All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dennis.